Hello there, I'm Sriqui23. Welcome once again to yet another episode of my game collection. Today we'll be going over my collection of Sega Dreamcast games, as well as the system, some of its accessories, and the history of it. Now, the Sega Dreamcast was kind of Sega's last hurrah in the console industry. If you saw my episode on the Sega Saturn, you know that that system bombed really hard, and as a result, Sega more or less pooled together all of its resources for one final sort of last-ditch effort to compete in the console market with the Dreamcast. Now, the Dreamcast was a great system for a variety of reasons, but it also ended up failing. For one thing, by this point, Sega was pretty much bleeding money constantly. Due to the failure of the Sega Saturn as well as various Sega Genesis add-ons, Sega had not been a major force in the industry for a number of years at this point, at least not here in North America. Um, when the Dreamcast came out, they had kind of already lost too much ground. It was kind of too little too late. Plus, then almost immediately after the system was released, Sony announced the release of the PlayStation 2, which would go on to become the best-selling system in history, and Sega just realized that they could not compete. There was nothing that they could do, really, in spite of their best efforts. Now, the Sega Dreamcast is actually based off of their Sega's Naomi arcade board, which actually allowed for some very excellent arcade ports to the system. In fact, especially fighting games. This system had just an absurd number of amazing fighting games. It probably with the possible exception of the Neo Geo, it probably had the best lineup of fighting games of any system in history. Though, that being said, the fact that it was able to so closely emulate the arcade was both a blessing and a curse. For one thing, arcades were kind of dying out at this time. The sort of quick pick up and play arcade style gameplay was kind of out of vogue at the moment in exchange for kind of more longer cinematic experiences. And in a way, the Dreamcast being so good at emulating the arcade, in a way, kind of helped accelerate the arcade's demise. Since, like, what's the point of popping quarters into a machine when you can play the game for free at home, essentially? That being said, the system had a number of innovations. It had 4 controller ports. Its system was based on Windows CE architecture. I'm not sure if you can see it, but in here, there is actually a dial-up modem attached to this thing that you could use to connect your console over the internet. And in a way, it kind of almost acted like a mini PC. Like, there was even a web browser and stuff like that, and you could play games online, although, albeit with very slow, sort of 1999 era dial-up internet. And in fact, some people actually still play games online on this system today, even though the official servers have long since gone down. Some dedicated players still are kind of keeping this thing alive. Now, as for accessories, and controllers, I've got quite a few. This is your standard sort of Sega Dreamcast controller. It's a little odd in some ways. For one thing, the cord actually comes out through the bottom, and the idea is that there's this clip on the back that you were supposed to sort of feed the cord through. I don't know why they made it like that. Also, the plastic isn't the greatest in the world, and it only had one analog stick. And also, this analog stick is rather slippery. It doesn't have a rubber top to it, so it kind of feels a little weird to play with. Also, it was good for certain games, but not for others, like fighting games, which unfortunately was a good chunk of its library. Now, the controller, unlike when I showed you the Nintendo 64 controller, it had an accessory port. This one actually has 2 accessory ports, and For one thing, this is the rumble pack for the controller, and it was done so that it had two accessory ports for the reason that this way you could have a memory card and a rumble pack in the controller at the same time, whereas on the N64 you kind of had to swap them out. Now the memory card was actually a very interesting thing. This is the Dreamcast VMU, or Visual Memory Unit, and this was the memory card for it, and it's kind of designed in a similar way to a Tamagotchi. It has kind of a very sort of black and white LCD screen, low resolution. What was cool about this is that not only could you manage your saves outside of the game, like you could kind of take it out and manage your save files and stuff, you could also play like little mini games or keep sort of little virtual pets and stuff like that on this thing. It was a really neat idea. Sadly, most games never really used it. Some games actually used it as a second screen. So in Resident Evil Code Veronica on the Dreamcast, for example, it would actually show your health, whereas normally you'd have to access the pause screen to see it in-game. You could see it on the VMU, which was very cool. Again, not every game used it, and you could see that these two, and you could actually plug two of these things together for multiplayer. Again, very neat idea. Now in here I actually have a Sega Dreamcast keyboard. What this was used for was for a variety of things. For one thing, it was used for online interactions, because again, online was very big. Some games supported it, such as Phantasy Star Online, which had a chat feature so that you could chat with the other people you were playing with. It also, some games like Quake 3 Arena or Unreal Tournament allowed for the use of mouse and keyboard, sort of PC style controls. And there were even a couple of typing tutors on the system, like the Typing of the Dead, which is actually a really interesting game. Sadly, I don't have it. Now, the unfortunate thing about the Dreamcast is that because it was so short-lived and because not many people bought it, even though it has a ton of great games, those games tend to be rather expensive. And and so, as a result, I don't really have many games for the system. I only have about 18 in total. Overall, they're worth about $669, and many of them are actually quite valuable, but I'm going to show you these. First up is Choo Choo Rocket. This is kind of a fun puzzle game. It was meant to be played primarily online, but it also has single player. Very cool. Crazy Taxi. This one's a lot of fun. I remember playing this a lot in the arcades back in the day, and the Dreamcast version is pretty much arcade perfect. Basically, you have to race to your destination, take your passenger to their destination by any means necessary. Daytona, USA. This is a cool one. Again, this one was also sort of an early online game. It's a port of their much earlier Daytona, USA game. Got Dead or Alive 2. That's a really cool fighting game. Grandia 2, which is a really good RPG. The Sega Dreamcast, unfortunately, did not have many RPGs, but the few that it had were generally very good, and this is one of the best. I've got Machin X. This one's interesting. It's kind of a first-person sword fighting game. It's made by the same people who make Persona, which is why it has a very similar art style. I've got Marvel vs. Capcom. This is a really cool fighting game. Excellent port from the arcade, where you get to play as Capcom and Marvel characters and stuff like that. It's very frantic and frenetic. Now this next one, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, is actually one of the rarest and most expensive games that I own. It's worth about $190 to give you an idea. At least at the time when I'm making this video, it may have gone up or down since then. This is really probably one of my favorite fighting games of all time. It has a great art style that really captures the sort of action of both franchises, and it has a huge roster of characters. It's just great. Metropolis Street Racing here. This one's actually kind of the spiritual predecessor to Project Gotham Racing on the Xbox. It's a cool game. NFL 2K. Now, one thing about the Dreamcast is that EA, Electronic Arts, refused to support it, and as a result, they didn't have they didn't bring their staple of sports games to the system. So stuff like Madden or FIFA or stuff like that, they weren't able to get. So instead, Sega kind of created their own sports label called the 2K series. It's known to be really good. Like in many ways, it actually kind of surpassed EA's offerings. Sega Bass Fishing. This one's cool. It's you wouldn't think a fishing game would be very exciting, but it's actually a lot of fun. Like it has a lot of high intensity energy to it. It was actually a cool fishing reel accessory that would have originally come with this thing, but unfortunately I don't have it. But and unfortunately, they also tend to break very easily, so working ones are rather expensive. There's Sega GT, which was kind of Sega's answer to Sony's Gran Turismo series. Sonic Adventure 2. The Sonic Adventure games are rightfully probably seen as rather not very good, if I'm being honest, but I kind of love them anyway. Like, I agree with all the criticisms, but these games are they're stupid, but they're fun in spite of being stupid. Soul Calibur. Now, this one is a classic. This one was, at the time, many people considered it to be probably the best fighting game ever made. Like, it really was, not only did it match the arcade, but it actually surpassed it in many respects. It's an excellent 3D weapons-based fighting game. It's a great game. Down here I have Space Channel 5. This is it's essentially a sci-fi themed, sort of J-pop themed rhythm game. Very interesting. Tokyo Extreme Racer. That was a cool one. I believe it continued on the PlayStation 2 after the demise of the Dreamcast. There's Virtua Tennis. Again, Sega they created a bunch of rather excellent sports games that are in some ways even better than sports games released today. And this is an excellent tennis game. Lastly, all the way down here at the bottom, it comes in this dual jewel case here, I have Shenmue. Now, Shenmue was rather revolutionary for its time. Like, it's a bit hokey nowadays, but this was really one of the very first, world... I don't want to say open world games, but games that kind of packed in just a ton of detail and a ton of small things that you normally wouldn't really think of, like the fact that you could open people's drawers and rifle through them, the fact that there was a lot going on in the game that you could very easily miss, and it had a very good story overall it's a fascinating game. I wouldn't say it's aged particularly well, but it's certainly worth playing for the experience alone. And yeah, that's about it for my Dreamcast collection. I do hope to get more of these games in the future, hopefully without having to spend an arm and a leg. It's also worth noting that Dreamcast games, despite coming in CD cases, actually did not use CD-ROMs. Instead, they used their own sort of proprietary format called GD-ROMs, the G standing for gigabyte, because they could hold about 1 gigabyte of data, which was about twice as much as your average CD, which was a lot for 1999, but then soon after the DVD kind of became standard, and that one could hold up to 6 gigabytes, I believe. So it was interesting at first, but it very quickly became outdated. But yeah, I honestly love the Dreamcast in spite of its faults and failings. And in many ways, it kind of holds a special place in my heart because as a kid, I was given an option for my first game system between either the Dreamcast or the N64. And I've always and I don't regret my choice of choosing the N64, but I've always kind of wondered, like, what would have, how would my tastes in gaming have evolved if I had chosen the Dreamcast instead? Maybe I would actually be halfway decent at fighting games nowadays, or something, but I don't know. But overall, just a great system with a lot of great games. Just wish that they were more affordable. But yeah, that's the way it goes sometimes. But yeah, I'd like to thank you all very much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and to follow me on Instagram, where I show new pictures of games almost every day. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time. Take care.